Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we're going to talk about some European books. So, for the past 10 years, I've been lucky enough to have been able to travel internationally about once a year. It hasn't been every single year for the past 10 years, but nearly. I love to travel. A lot of my travel is solo, but every now and again I do travel with friends and or my partner. So this year in 2025, I am lucky enough to be able to take not one, but two international trips. This was actually not my intention, but opportunities came up. And so I am doing two big international trips. And so what I decided was that I wanted to read one or two books from the countries that I will be visiting. So I went through my shelves and I picked out a whole bunch of books that I have that are either by authors from these countries or are set in these countries. There is absolutely no way that I am going to be able to read all of these books, but I do have a really good selection to choose from. So we are going to go over this today. The first trip that I have coming up is in March, and I will be heading to Lisbon, Portugal. I have never been to Portugal, so I am very, very excited to head there. One of my bucket list travel items is to see Sintra, which is in Portugal, and I am just so excited that I'm going to be able to do this. So let's get started on the Portuguese books that I have picked. The first one is Night Train to Lisbon by Pascal Mercier. Now, Pascal Mercier is actually not a Portuguese author. He is actually a Swiss author, and this book is translated from the German by Barbara Harshav. And the reason I picked this is because I'm actually doing a reading challenge for the Massachusetts Center of the Books, and the February pick is to read a book with a city in the title. And since I knew I was heading to Lisbon and I had this book, I had to pick it. It's not by a Portuguese author, but it is set in Lisbon. And this is about Raymond Gregorius, who teaches classical languages at a Swiss school, and he lives a life governed by routine. One day, a chance encounter with a Portuguese woman inspires him to question his life and leads him to an extraordinary book that will embolden him to change it. Gregorius boards a train to Lisbon, prompted by the words of Amadeo de Prado, a doctor whose intelligence and magnetism left a mark on everyone who met him, and whose principles brought him into a confrontation with Salazar's dictatorship. So this sounds really interesting. I am looking forward to reading it, and I am reading it before I leave. Next, I have The Migrant Painter of Birds by Lidia Jorge, and this is translated from the Portuguese by Margaret Hull Costa, and I am definitely going to read this. This is a Portuguese author. This is Portuguese literature. And the setting of this extraordinary novel is an old farmhouse in Portugal, a house far enough from the Atlantic not to hear the breaking waves during a storm, but near enough for the walls to be corroded by the salt in the air. With most members of her large family having left the hardship of life in this landscape of sand and stone for jobs in faraway places, a young woman struggles to piece together her past from the many indiffering stories she is told. Left behind by a free-spirited, feckless father, a seducer with a talent for drawing, she is raised by her uncle who has married her mother. The only memories of her father's one brief visit are the echoes of his footsteps on the stairs leading to her room. The only signs of him are letters from the widest reaches of the world, letters accompanied by brilliantly colored drawings of exotic birds. The cuckoo from India, the ibis from Mozambique, the goose from Labrador, the hummingbird from the West Indies. The daughter longs for her father, and as she grows up, she is determined to find him and uncover the truth. This sounds like a really fascinating novel. I don't know anything about this author. Here she is on the back, but I am definitely reading this. Next is Baltasar and Blimunda by Jose Saramago, translated from the Portuguese by Giovanni Pontiero. Now, Jose Saramago is a very well-known Portuguese author. I believe, is he? Yes, he won the 1998 Nobel Prize for Literature. So, very well-known, Nobel Prize-winning author. I have never read any of his works, so I do have this. I doubt that I'll be able to read it before I go, but I do have this on my shelves in case I want to pick it up. And this is set in Portugal in 1711. An amorous friar is pursued naked through the rubble-strewn streets of Lisbon. An enthusiastic procession of flagellants roars with pleasure over the damnation of adultery. A royal prince uses hapless soldiers for target practice, and women dressed in colorful finery watch as lapsed converts and sorcerers are put to death by flames. In the midst of the terrors of the Inquisition and the plague, a seemingly mismatched couple discovers the wonders of love. This poetic tale, graced with exquisite historical detail and full of magic and adventure, is a tapestry of human folly and human will. So that's Jose Saramago, Baltasar, and Blimunda. The last Portuguese author that I have in my collection is this little tiny Penguin Modern classic, I Have More Souls Than One by Fernando Pessoa, and this is translated from the Portuguese by Jonathan Griffin. And I believe that this is just a book of poetry. Fernando Pessoa is a Portuguese poet. I am not a huge fan of poetry, but I have this, and so I might as well read it. And it's a teeny little thing, so I can probably read this before I go. Written in the voices of 4 different alter egos, these rich and strange verses by Portugal's greatest poet express a maelstrom of conflicted thoughts and feelings. So that's it for Portugal. My next international trip is occurring in May, and this is a birthday celebration for my partner who is turning 50 this year, and I just did not want his 50th birthday to go by without being acknowledged in some way. So we are heading to Europe, and we're going to visit a couple of countries, but there's one country in particular that we will be spending the most time. But let's first start with the country that we'll be initially flying into, and that is the Netherlands. I have never been to the Netherlands. I have never seen Amsterdam. I'm very much looking forward to seeing this. We're probably going to spend only about a couple days there, but I do have a couple of options for some Dutch literature, which, funny enough, is not readily available. I never had heard of these books from these Dutch authors, and so it was very interesting trying to comb through my shelves to see if I had anything. I did have one book, but there was another book that I did order for the purpose, and that book that I ordered is a Dutch classic, apparently, and it's called The Evenings by Gerard Reve. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I'm not entirely sure. And this is translated from the Dutch by Sam Garrett. And like I said, this is a Dutch classic. It was originally published in 1947. And from what I understand, Reve was the first openly gay author in the country's history. So, fun fact. And I will probably read this before I go. It's a very winter book. From what I gathered from reading, people read this every winter. People in the Netherlands read this every winter because it's set, I think, during the 12 days of Christmas or something like that. I'm not sure. But here's the synopsis. 23-year-old Fritz, office worker, daydreamer, teller of inappropriate jokes, finds life absurd and inexplicable. He lives with his parents who drive him mad. He has terrible, disturbing dreams of death and destruction. Sometimes he talks to a toy rabbit. This is the story of 10 evenings in Fritz's life at the end of December as he drinks, smokes, sees friends, aimlessly wanders the gloomy city streets, and tries to make sense of the minutes, hours, and days that stretch before him. So when I was looking at this book, a lot of people said that it was the Dutch version of Catcher in the Rye. And I, am not the biggest fan of Catcher in the Rye, so I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about this book, but it is a classic and I wanted to try it, and I found it used on Pango Book. The Dutch book that I did have in my collection, which I was actually surprised about because I did not realize it was a Dutch author, and this is Adrift in the Middle Kingdom by J. Slauerhoff, and this is translated from the Dutch by David McKay. And this was published in 1934. Slauerhoff's narrator is a Belfast ship's radio operator desperate to escape the sea, who travels inland on a gunrunner's mission. He moves through extraordinary settings: opium salons, the House of Cantonese watch member, the siege of Shanghai, the great flood on the Western Plains, and the discovery of oil by the uncomprehending overlord of the hidden city of Chungking. The fantasy ending transforms the novel from travelogue and adventure to an existential meditation on how to live. But running like a thread of darkness through the story is opium, from poppy head harvesting to death through addiction. This does not sound like a happy book. Neither does The Evenings. So interesting. If you know more about Dutch literature, is it a trend for Dutch literature to be dark? So these two seem very dark, very interesting. So the last book I have here is not a Dutch author, but it is set in Holland. And this is The Black Tulip by Alexandre Dumas. And some of you may know that Alexandre Dumas is a French author, famously for The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, etc. And this is a Penguin classic, and I have never read anything else from Alexandre Dumas other than The Count of Monte Cristo. So if I can get to this before I go, great. Otherwise, this has been on my TBR for a while, so I will be reading this eventually. Cornelius van Baerle, a respectable tulip grower, lives only to cultivate the elusive black tulip and win a magnificent prize for its creation. But after his powerful godfather is assassinated, the unwitting Cornelius becomes caught up in a deadly political intrigue and is falsely accused of high treason by a bitter rival. Condemned to life imprisonment, his only comfort is Rosa, the jailer's beautiful daughter, and together they concoct a plan to grow the black tulip in secret. Dumas' last major historical novel is a tale of romantic love, jealousy, and obsession, interweaving historical events surrounding the brutal murders of two Dutch statesmen in 1672 with the phenomenon of tulipomania that gripped 17th century Holland. So we've got like a little tulip murder mystery here. The next country after the Netherlands is Germany, and that is where we're going to spend most of our time because Germany is actually the country that my partner really wants to visit. His ancestry is German, and we are going to see if we can try and visit the ancestral village that his family emigrated from in the 1800s. And we are going to travel a little bit around Germany. So I have a lot of German suggestions. And funny enough, when I was going through all my translated literature, I was surprised at how much German literature that I have. And no way I'm reading all of these. So let's start with the classic All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. And I just did a video recently about books coming into the public domain. All Quiet on the Western Front, the first English translation from 1929, just came into the public domain in 2025. However, I just picked this up. It is a brand new translation and translated by Kurt Beals. And I'm intrigued about this because I did read the first English translation, who I honestly can't remember who that translator was. So I've already read that one. And supposedly this translation makes it more true to the original and actually puts back things that may have been taken out by the 1920s censors. So that's exciting. And this is the seminal World War I story of German youths in the trenches. I am looking forward to reading this again with this new translation. This next one I'm really excited about because I actually had no idea that it was a German story. And this is The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. And if you are roughly my age, you may remember the movie from the 1980s. I loved that movie. I loved that movie. And you remember the song? I literally had the song in my head the other day on a loop and I could not get it out. So this was published in 1979, the year I was born. So we are the same age. And when I looked at who the translator was, this book does not tell me who the translator is, which is very frustrating. I hate when books do that. It just says that the translation copyright belongs to Doubleday from 1983. But according to Wikipedia, the translator is likely someone named Ralph Mannheim. And I loved that movie. And I've never read the book, so that's why I have this. I do want to read it, and I'm still traumatized. You guys remember this? From what happened to Atreyu and Artax in the Swamp of Sadness? Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm still traumatized by that. But I loved that movie. Anyway, this is a fantasy book where we follow Bastian, who finds a magical book that transports him to another world where he is destined to save it. Next German selection would be anything by the Brothers Grimm. This edition that I have here is a Penguin cloth bound, and this edition is translated by Philip Pullman. And you've got the classic fairy tale stories, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, basically anything that Disney took, sanitized, and then made into a movie, a cartoon, is in here. I will not be reading this before I go, but I do have this in my collection and eventually plan on reading it someday. And so to round out the German classics, I have a bunch of these littles. And we've got sketchy, doubtful, incomplete jottings by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I am not exactly sure what this is about. We've got the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Everyone knows about that. I've got Aphorisms on Love and Hate by Nietzsche. And How a Ghastly Story Was Brought to Light by a Common or Garden Butcher's Dog by Johann Peter Hebel. That sounds really interesting. Maybe I will read that before I go. And then lastly, for the littles, Why Do You Wear a Cheap Watch by Hans Fallada. So those are German classic selections. Next, I have a couple of books by contemporary German authors. The first one is Good Girl by Aria Aber. This literally just came out this month, so hot off the press. And Aria Aber is a German Afghan writer. She actually wrote this in English. So she was, I think, raised in Germany. She writes in Afghan, she writes in German, and now she's writing in English. So this is not in translation, but it is by a German author. And it is set in contemporary Berlin. And the blurb here says, an electric debut novel about the daughter of Afghan refugees and her year of self-discovery, and a portrait of the artist as a young woman set in Berlin that can't escape its history. And then the tagline says, a girl can get in almost anywhere, even if she can't get out. That sounds really good. So contemporary German author, albeit written in English. And the second contemporary author that I have is Broken Glass Park by Alina Bronsky. This is translated from the German by Tim Moore. Alina Bronsky, I think, was born in Russia, but pretty much raised in Germany, so I'm considering her a German author. The heroine of this thoroughly contemporary novel is Sasha Neyman. Sasha was born in Moscow, but now lives in Berlin with her two younger siblings, and until recently, her mother. She is precocious, independent, streetwise, and, since her stepfather murdered her mother several months ago, an orphan. Unlike most of her companions, she doesn't dream of escaping from the tough housing project where they live. Sasha's dreams are different. She longs to write a novel about her beautiful but naive mother, and she wants to end the life of Vadim, the man who brutally murdered her. All right, and these last selections are books by non-German authors, but they are set in Germany. And the first one is just a compilation of stories called Berlin Stories. And this is from various authors. The stories will be set in Germany. Because this is a compilation of like really short stories, I am probably going to read this before I go because I can just read one story a day in the morning with my coffee. So I could probably get this out before I go since I'm not leaving until May. Spanning more than a century, this collection of stories reflects Berlin's rich and dramatic history, chronicling the creative ferment of the Weimar Republic, the devastation of wartime, the cruel divisions of the Berlin Wall, and the aftermath of reunification. Next is Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. Isherwood was a British-American author, and this is a semi-autobiographical novel about his travels and experiences in interwar Berlin. And this book actually inspired the Broadway musical Cabaret, one of my favorite musicals. I performed it in college and is just still to this day one of my favorite musicals. Set in the 1930s, Goodbye to Berlin evokes the glamour and sleaze, excess and repression of Berlin society. Isherwood shows the lives of people at threat from the rise of the Nazis. A wealthy Jewish heiress, Natalia Landauer, a gay couple, Peter and Otto, and an English upper-class waif, the divinely decadent Sally Bowles. Next is Rhine Journey by Anne Schlee. Anne Schlee is an American-British author, and this was shortlisted for the 1981 Booker Prize, and it's basically about a Victorian middle-aged woman's awakening during a German vacation. A fragile, decorously paced novella about a middle-aged English woman's sudden twist for independence from her repressive relations, the surprising byproduct of a tourist Rhine journey of the 1850s. Charlotte's fantasies, given body and voice by this mystery man's presence, throb with heartache and latent fury. An appalling tale with immaculate period ambiance. So this looks really interesting. The last book set in Germany by a non-German author in my collection is The Recent East by Thomas Grattan. I believe Thomas Grattan is American, I think. So I don't know much about this author, sorry. And this is about, shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Beate Haas, who defected from East Germany as a child, is notified that her parents' abandoned mansion is available for her to reclaim. Newly divorced and eager to escape her bleak life in upstate New York, where she has lived as an adult, she arrives with her two teenagers to discover a city that has become an unrecognizable ghost town. The move fractures the siblings' close relationship as Michael, free to be gay, takes to looting empty houses and partying with wannabe anarchists, while Adela, fascinated with the horrors of the Holocaust, buries herself in books and finds companionship in a previously unknown cousin. So that's it for Germany. I haven't quite decided which book I'm going to read before I go, but I am going to choose one. I'm definitely going to choose the Berlin Stories, but because that's short stories, I can just read that whenever. I just need to choose. Maybe I'll do the Neverending Story, but that's a thick book, so we'll see. The next country on the list is Poland. Like I said, we are going to be spending most of our time in Germany, but we are going to make a side trip for a couple of days to Poland, and I have never been to Poland, so I am very excited for that. And I have one book in my collection by a Polish author that I am definitely going to be reading, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I have talked about it before, and that is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. And this is translated from the Polish by Antonia Lloyd-Jones. And Tokarczuk won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2018. And this book I recently talked about because I love the title. And this is set in a remote Polish village. Janina devotes the dark winter days to studying astrology, translating the poetry of William Blake, and taking care of the summer homes of wealthy Warsaw residents. Her reputation as a crank and a recluse is only amplified by her not-so-secret preference for the company of animals over humans. Same. Then a neighbor, Bigfoot, turns up dead. Soon other bodies are discovered in an increasingly strange circumstances. As suspicions mount, Janina inserts herself into the investigation, certain that she knows who done it, if only anyone would pay her mind. So I am looking forward to reading this. And then I do have two Penguin Modern Classic Littles by Polish authors. The first one being An Advertisement for Toothpaste by Ryszard Kapuscinski. That's one. And The Three Electronites by Stanislaw Lem. That's the other. I don't know much about either of these, but they're small enough I could probably get to them. But I definitely am looking forward to reading that. The last country that we may or may not be going to, we actually haven't decided if we are going to try to visit this country, and that country would be Austria. So even though I don't know whether I am actually going to Austria, I did pick out a couple of books by Austrian authors. The Piano Teacher by Elfriede Jelinek, translated from the German by Joachim Neugroschel. I really apologize if I'm butchering these names. I'm so sorry. I did look them up before I filmed, but I obviously did not work in my head. Jelinek won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2004, and this is a very well-known Austrian book. And I think they also made it into a movie. I have not seen it. And from what I understand, it's very provocative. And this is a searing portrait of a woman bound between a repressive society and her darkest desires. 38-year-old Erika Kohut teaches piano at the prestigious and formal Vienna Conservatory and still lives with her domineering mother. Her life appears boring, but Erika has a secret. She visits Turkish peep shows at night and watches sadomasochistic films. When a handsome, self-absorbed 17-year-old student attempts to seduce her, she resists, but then dark passions roiling under her subdued exterior explode in a release of perversity, violence, and degradation. That sounds fascinating. The next Austrian author is Grand Hotel by Vicky Baum. I just recently talked about this in my public domain video because this was published in 1929, so it is now in the public domain. This is translated from the German by Basil Creighton. And Baum is an Austrian writer, but this is set in 1920s Berlin. So I'm thinking maybe I could choose this as my German book pick, since it's set in Germany, but it's an Austrian author. So I kind of, kill two birds with one stone. I get Austria and Germany, and maybe we'll see. This follows several quirky guests as they interact in this hotel in Germany. You've got some World War I veterans, you've got ballerinas, you've got criminals, failing businessmen. Through the revolving doors of Grand Hotel pass multifarious stray souls, some resigned to their drab fates, others searching eagerly for life, all persuaded that it has somehow passed them by. We meet them as they come under the practiced eye of the staff, expert in Weimar Berlin's taxonomies of class. Like George Gross, Vicky Baum renders human foibles at their most pathetic, despicable, and comical, then turns her characters inside out until we recognize our own hopes and fears refracted in them. Next is Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler, and this is translated from the German by J.M.Q. Davies. And this is a 1926 novella that deals with the thoughts and psychological transformations of Dr. Fridolin over a 2-day period after his wife confesses having had sexual fantasies involving another man. So it's a teeny little thing, so I could probably get through it. And then the last is another little, and this is My Dearest Father by Mozart. Yes, that Mozart. And this is basically letters between Mozart and his father, which seem really interesting. They have a quote here that I thought was really good. They wanted me to give a concert. I wanted them to beg me. And so they did. I gave a concert. I like that. So I am looking forward to reading this, regardless of whether I go to Austria or not. So that's it. 2 trips that I have coming up in 2025. 4, possibly 5 countries that I'll visit. And I'm definitely going to read at a minimum 1 book from each country before I head there. And all of these other books were in my collection, and so they're already on my TBR, and I do want to read them at some point in time. And let me know if you've read any of these. Are you doing any traveling this year, international or no? What are you going to read to prepare for your trip? Let me know if you know of any other authors from these countries that I didn't talk about that I should put on my list. I may not get to them before I do my trip, but I can definitely look into them. So let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day. Bye.